The CEO lured his ex into a humiliating meeting thinking he'd finally break her. But when she walked in with her 3-year-old twin daughters and revealed the true father was in the room, he was left utterly speechless. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. New York City in 2008 was a place of stark contrasts. While Wall Street executives whispered anxiously about the looming financial crisis in gleaming skyscrapers, Rebecca Thompson was too busy racing between her 3 jobs to worry about economic forecasts. "Order up for table 12!" the head chef shouted over the controlled chaos of the 11 Madison Park kitchen. Rebecca tucked a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear and straightened her crisp white shirt. At 24, she still wasn't used to the pristine uniforms required at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. She balanced the intricate plates with practiced precision, pushing through the swinging doors into the dining room where soft lighting cast a golden glow over the city's elite. "Wild mushroom and black truffle risotto," she announced, placing the dish before a silver-haired woman dripping in diamonds. "And the Nova Scotia lobster with Meyer lemon confit for the gentleman." The rest of the table received their dishes with barely a glance in her direction, except for one. A man in his early 30s studied her with unexpected intensity as she worked. His tailored suit suggested old money, but there was something calculated in his gaze that hinted at ambition rather than inheritance. Rebecca maintained her professional smile despite her aching feet. This was her 3rd shift today. Morning as an assistant at a boutique design firm in the garment district, afternoon distributing flyers in Times Square, and now evening service at 11 Madison Park. Every moment was a step toward her dream, surviving long enough in New York to make her design aspirations reality. "Excuse me," the intense man's voice cut through her thoughts as she passed with an empty tray. "The sommelier recommended the 2001 Chateau Margaux, but I believe the 1998 would better complement our selections." The sommelier, a French veteran with 20 years of experience, flushed slightly. "The gentleman is correct," he conceded with a tight smile. "The 1998 was an exceptional year." Rebecca watched the table's dynamic shift as everyone regarded the man with newfound respect. He caught her eye and winked, not flirtatiously, but as if they shared a secret understanding. 3 hours later, as she counted her tips in the staff room, the maitre d' approached with an envelope. "From table 7, he said with a curious expression. Inside, she found $500 and a business card. "Maxwell Reed, Vice President of Operations, Reed Development Group." On the back, a handwritten phone number and message. "Real talent doesn't belong behind a serving tray. Call me." The rooftop bar of the Standard Hotel offered a panoramic view that still took Rebecca's breath away, even after 3 years in the city. Manhattan glittered below like the jewelry box she'd dreamed about as a little girl in Columbus, Ohio. "Impressive, isn't it?" Maxwell said, joining her at the railing, 2 martinis in hand. "Though I suspect you're no longer easily impressed after surviving here on your own." Rebecca accepted the drink, studying him. At 32, Maxwell Reed carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about making rent. His dark hair was expertly cut, his watch worth more than her annual income, yet there was something hungry in his eyes that resonated with her. "What gave me away?" she asked. "That I'm not a native New Yorker? The way you still look up at the buildings," he smiled. "Locals look straight ahead or down at their phones." Over drinks, Rebecca learned that Maxwell was the only son of William Reed, CEO of one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast. The Reed name adorned office buildings, luxury condominiums, and boutique hotels across Manhattan. "Enough about my family's buildings," he said, waving away the topic. "Tell me about yourself. What brings a Midwestern girl to the city's most competitive restaurant?" "Design," she admitted. "I studied fashion and industrial design at Ohio State, came here with big dreams and discovered that New York has a surplus of dreamers and a shortage of opportunities." "May I?" Maxwell asked, gesturing to her weathered messenger bag. When she hesitated, he added, "I have a feeling about you, Rebecca Thompson." She reluctantly handed him her portfolio, a worn leather folder containing sketches she worked on during subway rides and rare breaks. Maxwell studied each page with unexpected seriousness, asking questions about materials and functionality. "This convertible handbag design, it's brilliant," he said, pointing to a sketch of a purse that transformed from professional to evening wear with a few adjustments. "Have you shown this to anyone in the industry?" "I've tried," Rebecca sighed. "Most design houses want experience I don't have, and boutiques want capital I definitely don't have." Maxwell closed the portfolio with decision. "What you need is the right introduction." Over the next month, Rebecca found herself swept into Maxwell's world of exclusive restaurants, VIP lounges, and penthouse parties. He introduced her to design contacts who nodded politely but made no promises. Still, for the first time since arriving in New York, Rebecca felt her dreams might be within reach. In Maxwell's sprawling Tribeca apartment, she traced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. "Does this view ever get old?" she asked. "Some things never lose their wonder," he replied, watching her rather than the view. That night, when Maxwell kissed her, Rebecca told herself this was just another Manhattan fairy tale, the successful businessman and the struggling artist. What she couldn't explain was the way her heart raced when he called, or how his rare, genuine smiles felt like victories. "You're different," he whispered against her skin. "My secret enchantment in this cynical city." After 3 months, Rebecca noticed the pattern. Maxwell never took her to events where financial publications might have photographers. He introduced her as a talented designer I'm mentoring, rather than his girlfriend. His family name came up in conversation constantly, but she never met a single read. "Why haven't I met your family?" she finally asked one evening as they shared takeout in her tiny Lower East Side apartment, one of the rare times he'd visited her space. Maxwell looked distinctly uncomfortable, glancing at the peeling paint and the roommate's laundry drying on a rack. "My family is traditional," he said carefully. "They have expectations about who I should be seen with. Business connections, social standing. It's exhausting." "And I'm a waitress from Ohio," Rebecca finished for him. "You're extraordinary," he corrected, pulling her close. "They wouldn't understand that. Not yet. Let's give it time." She believed him because she wanted to, because his arms felt like home in a city that had shown her little kindness. "He's just protecting me from the press until we're more established," Rebecca explained to her roommate Zoe, who eyed her skeptically. "Then why does his Instagram show him at charity galas with socialites but never with you?" Zoe challenged, showing her phone. "Rich guys like that have patterns, Becca." Rebecca changed the subject, but the seed of doubt took root. 7 months into their relationship, Rebecca woke before dawn to prepare Maxwell's favorite breakfast. He'd stayed over, a rare occurrence, and she wanted to make the most of the morning. "You're up early," he mumbled, already checking emails on his phone. "I need to be out of here by 7. Board meeting." "I made frittata," she said, setting down the plate. "And I was thinking, the design contact you introduced me to last month." "Rebecca," he interrupted gently, "I need to handle some family business before pursuing more introductions. My father's been asking questions about where I spend my time." "You could tell him the truth," she suggested, trying to keep her voice light, "that you're seeing someone." Maxwell's expression closed like a vault. "It's not that simple. The Reed name comes with responsibilities." He was gone before the frittata cooled, with a quick kiss and a promise to call later. That night, for the first time, Rebecca whispered, "I love you," as they lay in his luxurious king-sized bed, rain pattering against the windows of his Tribeca apartment. Maxwell hesitated just long enough for her to notice before changing the subject to his new development project in Brooklyn. Rebecca stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep, wondering why the words had caught in her throat like a confession rather than a celebration. 3 weeks later, Rebecca stared at the pregnancy test in her tiny bathroom, the pink plus sign unmistakable in the harsh fluorescent light. Her hands trembled as she took a second test, then a third, each confirming what seemed impossible. She and Maxwell had been careful, mostly careful. There was that night after the gallery opening, champagne clouding their judgment, and the weekend in the Hamptons when they'd run out of protection and Maxwell had assured her, "The timing's fine." 3 positive tests lined up on her bathroom sink left no room for denial. She was carrying Maxwell Reed's child. Her phone felt unnaturally heavy as she dialed his number, heart pounding. What would he say? Would this be the push they needed to make their relationship official? Or would it expose the cracks she'd been trying to ignore? "Maxwell," she said when he answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk. Today. It's important." "I'm in meetings until 6, he began, but something in her silence must have communicated the urgency. "Is everything okay?" "I need to see you in person," she insisted. "Please." His sigh crackled through the connection. "Come to my place at noon. I'll make an excuse to step out." Rebecca hung up and pressed her hands protectively over her still flat stomach. As she stared at her reflection, dark circles under her eyes from working 3 jobs, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she couldn't help wondering if this unexpected life inside her would finally make her enough. Enough for Maxwell to bring her into his world completely. Enough to be acknowledged as more than a secret enchantment. With trembling fingers, she reached for her coat and bag, rehearsing different ways to share the news that would change everything. She couldn't possibly know that by nightfall, she would be wandering the freezing streets of Manhattan alone, the bitter February wind nothing compared to the cold reality of Maxwell Reed's true character. While dialing Maxwell's number with trembling hands, Rebecca couldn't possibly imagine that this call would not only change her life but would transform her into a woman who would one day make the powerful Maxwell Reed beg for her attention. The February wind sliced through Rebecca's coat as she approached Maxwell's Tribeca building, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She'd taken special care with her appearance despite the churning in her stomach, a touch of mascara, her best sweater, hair loose the way he preferred, as if looking put together might somehow cushion what was to come. The doorman recognized her with a nod. "Mr. Reed is expecting you, Miss Thompson." In the elevator, Rebecca rehearsed the words again. "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. We're going to be parents." No matter how she phrased it, the reality seemed surreal, a plot twist in someone else's life story. When Maxwell opened his door, his expression was unreadable. "You're early," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "I couldn't wait," Rebecca replied, removing her coat with trembling fingers. His apartment gleamed with its usual perfection. Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, not a thing out of place. Maxwell himself looked impeccable in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, as if this emergency meeting were just another business appointment. "Would you like something to drink? Tea? Water?" He moved toward the kitchen, a picture of forced normalcy. "No, thank you." Rebecca remained standing, suddenly aware of how small she felt in his spacious living room. "Maxwell, there's something I need to tell you." He turned, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You sounded serious on the phone. Is everything all right?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, Maxwell didn't move, his expression frozen in polite attentiveness, as if waiting for the actual news. "I took 3 tests this morning," she continued, filling the silence. "All positive." Maxwell's posture changed almost imperceptibly, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a tightening around his eyes. He pushed away from the counter and walked to the bar cart by the window. "You're certain?" he asked, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. "Yes." He took a long swallow before turning to face her. "This will ruin everything." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Not, "We'll figure this out," or "I'm shocked, but we're in this together." Just 5 cold words that pulled the floor from beneath her feet. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Maxwell ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it for the first time she could remember. "This isn't part of the plan, Rebecca. Not for me, not now." "I don't understand." Rebecca took a step toward him. "I know it's unexpected, but—" "Unexpected?" He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "That's putting it mildly. Do you have any idea what this would do to my position at Reed Development? To the merger we're negotiating with Eastland Properties?" Rebecca stared at him, struggling to reconcile this cold, calculating man with the one who had whispered sweet promises against her skin just days ago. "This isn't about your company," she said. "This is about us, about a baby." "There is no us in the way you're thinking," Maxwell interrupted, his voice eerily calm. "You really believed I would introduce a waitress without a future to my family. This was fun, Rebecca, not a commitment." Each word sliced deeper than the February wind outside. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the apartment's perfect temperature. "Maxwell, I'm carrying your child," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Correction, you're facing a problem that needs to be resolved." He placed his tumbler down and moved to his desk, pulling out a checkbook. "How much would it take to make this disappear? 10,000? 20,000? Rebecca couldn't breathe. The man before her was unrecognizable, a stranger wearing Maxwell's face, speaking with Maxwell's voice, but lacking any trace of the person she thought she knew. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I thought you would want to be part of this." "Part of what, exactly?" Maxwell's pen hovered over the checkbook. "Throwing away everything I've worked for? Disappointing my father? Becoming tabloid fodder as the Reed heir who knocked up a cocktail waitress?" "I'm not a cocktail waitress," Rebecca corrected automatically, the insignificant detail somehow important amidst the collapse of her world. "And I'm a designer. You said my work was promising." Maxwell's laugh was cruel. "Promising for an amateur from Ohio, perhaps. But let's be realistic. You're serving tables at 30 different restaurants because no one in the industry takes your design seriously." The words struck with precision, targeting every insecurity she'd confided during intimate moments. Rebecca felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "I came here hoping we could talk about options together," she said. "I thought you cared about me." "I enjoyed our time together," Maxwell replied, his tone softening into something more dangerous, false compassion. "But surely you didn't imagine I was planning a future with someone like you. Be realistic, Rebecca." "Someone like me," she repeated, the words bitter on her tongue. "Don't take it personally. You're lovely, but we're from different worlds. You have to see that." He tore a check from the book and held it out. "This is the sensible solution." Rebecca stared at the check, its obscene amount blurring through unshed tears. "And if I want to keep the baby?" Maxwell's false compassion vanished. "Then you're on your own. I'll deny any involvement and trust me, no one would believe you over me." "You would deny your own child?" Rebecca asked, unable to comprehend the depth of his callousness. "What I'm offering is generous. Most men in my position wouldn't give you anything." He placed the check on the coffee table between them. "Take it and move on. Maybe go back to Ohio where things are simpler." The dismissal in his tone ignited something beyond heartbreak. Rebecca straightened her spine, leaving the check untouched. "I don't want your hush money, Maxwell. I just want to understand what happened to the man who said I was different. His secret enchantment." A flash of something, perhaps genuine regret, crossed his features before disappearing behind the cold mask. "That was before you complicated things, before you threatened everything I've worked for." "I didn't plan this," Rebecca's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "We were careful, but these things happen. I'm not trying to trap you or ruin your life. Yet here we are." Maxwell drained his whiskey and poured another. "What did you expect, Rebecca? That I'd propose? That the Reed family would welcome an unaccomplished provincial nobody into their ranks? Each adjective landed like a slap. Unaccomplished, provincial, nobody. I expected basic human decency, Rebecca replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. I expected the man who claimed to care about me to at least pretend he had a heart. This isn't a fairy tale, Maxwell snapped. Wake up. You were a pleasant distraction, not wife material, not the future mother of a Reed heir. Rebecca moved to the window, needing distance, struggling to process how completely she'd misread their relationship. Snow had begun falling outside, the first flakes of a forecasted blizzard swirling past the glass. Give me a few days, she said finally. This is a lot to process. Maybe we can talk when we're both calmer. There's nothing to discuss. Either take the money and handle it, or don't take the money and handle it alone. Maxwell's tone was final. But understand this. If you choose to have this baby, you will never see a penny from me or the Reed family. My lawyers will ensure that. Rebecca turned from the window, suddenly seeing Maxwell with perfect clarity. The handsome face, the elegant clothes, the perfect manners that had charmed her, all masking a profound emptiness. You're right about one thing, she said quietly. I am from a different world. A world where people don't abandon their responsibilities or treat others as disposable. Spare me the Midwestern morality lecture, Maxwell sneered. You've been in New York long enough to know how things work. People use each other all the time. Is that what I was to you? Someone to use? The realization hurt worse than all his previous cruelty. You got access to places and people you never would have met otherwise. Don't pretend you didn't benefit. Rebecca reached for her coat, unable to remain in his presence a moment longer. I never wanted access or benefits. I wanted you. A fundamental miscalculation on your part. Maxwell glanced at his watch. I have a meeting in 30 minutes. Have you made your decision? Yes. Rebecca buttoned her coat with dignity. I'm keeping my baby, and I'm keeping my self-respect. You can keep your money. Maxwell's expression hardened. Then we have nothing left to discuss. Apparently, we never did. Rebecca moved toward the door, but Maxwell stepped into her path. You should reconsider, he said, his tone now threatening. You can't afford a child. You can barely afford yourself. I'll manage, Rebecca replied, trying to step around him. Maxwell grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her flesh. You're making a mistake. Take the money. Let go of me. Rebecca's voice was steel. Not until you see reason, Maxwell insisted, his grip tightening. This isn't a game, Rebecca. This is my life, my reputation. With a strength born of outrage, Rebecca yanked her arm free. And this is my body, my baby, my choice. Maxwell's face contorted with rage. Get out, now. He grabbed her purse from the sofa and thrust it at her chest, then opened his front door and practically pushed her into the hallway. Forget my name, my number, my existence, he hissed. You were a lapse in judgment I won't repeat. The door slammed in Rebecca's face with such force that a neighboring resident poked their head out to investigate. Humiliated, clutching her purse to her chest, Rebecca stumbled toward the elevator as the first tears finally broke free. Outside, the snow had intensified. The afternoon sky darkened to premature evening. Rebecca stood on the sidewalk, watching yellow cabs splash through slush, pedestrians huddled against the growing storm, the world continuing as if her life hadn't just shattered. She couldn't face her roommates, couldn't bear their questions, or worse, their pity. Walking aimlessly, Rebecca found herself at Grand Central Station as night fell completely, the temperature dropping to bitter cold. Inside, among the crowds of commuters and travelers, she found an inconspicuous bench and collapsed, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. It's just us now, she whispered to the life within her, barely larger than a grain of rice yet already the center of her universe. But we'll be okay, I promise. The marble halls echoed with announcements and footsteps as Rebecca curled on the hard bench, her coat pulled tight around her, tears finally flowing freely. In that moment of absolute desolation, she couldn't possibly know that 15 years later she would be disembarking from her private jet to confront the man who had discarded her as insignificant. Morning sunlight filtered through the grimy windows of Grand Central Station, casting long shadows across Rebecca's face as she stirred from her restless sleep. Her body ached from the hard bench, and the realization of yesterday's events crashed over her anew. She was pregnant, alone, and had spent the night in a train station. Clutching her bag, Rebecca made her way to the public restroom, avoiding eye contact with the early commuters who glanced curiously at her rumpled clothes. In the harsh fluorescent light, she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually vibrant features looked hollow with exhaustion and shock. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself, attempting to tame her tangled hair with trembling fingers. "First, go home, then figure out the rest." Outside, New York had transformed into a winter wonderland, the previous night's blizzard having blanketed the city in 8 inches of snow. Under different circumstances, Rebecca might have found it beautiful. Now, it was just another obstacle as she trudged through slush toward the subway that would take her back to the Lower East Side. When she finally reached her apartment building, Rebecca hesitated at the door. Inside were 3 roommates who would inevitably notice her overnight absence and disheveled appearance. Questions would follow, pitying looks, whispers. She wasn't ready. Turning away, Rebecca headed to a nearby diner instead. With the last of her tip money, she ordered a plain toast and tea, the smell of other patrons' eggs and bacon turning her stomach. Morning sickness, she realized with a jolt. This was real. "You okay, honey?" asked the waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Gloria. Rebecca nodded automatically, unable to vocalize the seismic shift her life had undergone in the past 24 hours. "If you say so," Gloria replied skeptically, sliding an extra packet of crackers beside Rebecca's tea. "These help with the nausea. Been there 3 times myself." Rebecca's eyes welled with tears at the small kindness. "Thank you," she managed, the words catching in her throat. 3 weeks later, Rebecca stood in the tiny office of the boutique where she worked mornings, facing her manager's unsympathetic gaze. "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but customers expect a certain image. You've been late 4 times this month, and frankly, you look exhausted." The woman gestured vaguely at Rebecca's appearance. "We're going to have to let you go." Rebecca knew arguing was pointless. Morning sickness had made punctuality impossible, and 12-hour workdays across 3 jobs had left her perpetually drained. The first trimester fatigue was overwhelming, forcing her to nap between shifts in public parks or library corners. "I understand," she said quietly, gathering her few personal items from the drawer. "Thank you for the opportunity." Walking out into the bright spring day, Rebecca calculated her dwindling finances. Without the boutique job, rent would be impossible next month. The flyer distribution gig barely covered groceries, and her shifts at 11 Madison Park had been reduced after she'd accidentally dropped a tray of champagne flutes when a wave of dizziness struck. Her phone chimed with a text from Zoe. "Apartment meeting tonight. Important." The apartment meeting turned out to be an eviction notice, for Rebecca specifically. "We're really sorry," said Megan, the primary leaseholder, avoiding Rebecca's eyes. "But we can't afford to subsidize you if you're not paying your full share. And with a baby coming—" She trailed off, glancing uncomfortably at Rebecca's still flat stomach. "How did you know?" Rebecca asked, stunned. She'd been careful to hide her pregnancy, knowing it would complicate her already precarious living situation. "Small bathroom, thin walls," Zoe explained gently. "Morning sickness isn't exactly quiet." "We need to know your move-out date," Megan continued businesslike. "We've already found someone to take your spot." That night, after her shift at 11 Madison Park, where she'd been relegated to polishing silverware in the back to avoid customer contact, Rebecca sat on her narrow bed and scrolled through apartment listings she couldn't afford. Studios in Manhattan started at twice her current rent. Brooklyn wasn't much better. Queens offered slightly more reasonable options, but still beyond her means with only 2 jobs remaining. On impulse, she pulled up Maxwell's contact information. Surely he must have had time to reconsider his cruel dismissal. Perhaps if they spoke calmly, rationally. The call went straight to voicemail, as did the next 3. Her text messages showed as delivered but remained unanswered. By the 5th attempt, Rebecca accepted the crushing reality. She had been blocked. 2 days later, she found herself in the Bronx, following a hastily scrawled address to a dilapidated building where a basement room was being sublet for cash only. No questions asked. The space was barely larger than a closet, with a shared bathroom down the hall and walls so thin that the neighbors' arguments, television shows, and intimate moments provided a constant soundtrack. "It's just temporary," Rebecca assured herself as she placed her single suitcase on the sagging twin bed. A roach scuttled across the floor, disappearing into a crack in the baseboard. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca's life contracted to a brutal routine. Mornings were spent hunched over a toilet before dragging herself to a telemarketing center where she cold-called potential customers until her throat was raw. Evenings and weekends were dedicated to sewing alterations for cash, a skill from her design background that now kept her from complete destitution. The telemarketing supervisor, a perpetually irritated man named Vince, called her into his cramped office after she'd rushed to the bathroom for the 3rd time that morning. "Thompson, these breaks are becoming a problem," he snapped, not bothering to invite her to sit. "Other representatives make their calls without interruption." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, fighting back nausea even as she stood there. "It's a temporary condition." Vince's eyes narrowed as they flicked to her midsection, where the first subtle curve of pregnancy had begun to show. "How temporary?" "I'll be more efficient," she promised, avoiding the question. "See that you are," he replied dismissively. "Next time, it'll be your last warning." Rebecca nodded and returned to her cubicle, where the script for vacuum cleaner sales blurred before her eyes. She'd lost 5 pounds instead of gaining weight. Keeping food down was a daily struggle, and prenatal vitamins were an expense she could barely afford. That evening, after wolfing down a package of saltines, the only food that seemed to stay down, Rebecca made a decision. She would try one more time to reach Maxwell in person, not for herself, but for their child who deserved better than a roach-infested room and a mother working herself to collapse. The next morning, she put on her one remaining professional outfit, a navy dress from her boutique days, now loose where it had once fit perfectly, and made her way to the gleaming headquarters of Reed Development Group in Midtown. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, soaring ceilings, marble floors, and a security desk manned by 2 guards in impeccable uniforms. Rebecca approached with practiced confidence, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I have an appointment with Maxwell Reed," she lied smoothly. The guard checked his screen. "Name? Rebecca Thompson." His fingers tapped the keyboard. "I don't see you on Mr. Reed's calendar." "It was arranged last minute," Rebecca persisted. "Please, it's important. Just call up to his office." Something in her desperation must have registered because the guard picked up his phone and dialed. "Mr. Reed's office? I have a Rebecca Thompson here claiming she has an appointment." He listened, eyes flicking to Rebecca. "Yes, I'll inform her." He hung up, expression hardening. "Mr. Reed's assistant says you have no appointment and that Mr. Reed has instructed that you are not permitted on the premises." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. "Please, I just need 5 minutes." "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave," the guard interrupted, standing. "Mr. Reed has identified you as a former intern with personal issues." "Intern?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. "I was never—" "His exact words were an unstable intern with romantic delusions," the guard said uncomfortably. "Now please leave before I have to escort you out." The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain Rebecca had ever experienced. In the gleaming lobby of the Reed Empire, surrounded by the wealth and power she had once brushed against, she was being dismissed as delusional. "I'm carrying his child," she said, her voice breaking. The guard's expression shifted to pity, somehow worse than his previous sternness. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." When Rebecca remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the injustice, the second guard approached. Together they flanked her and guided her firmly toward the revolving doors, their hands not quite touching her but making it clear resistance would be futile. On the sidewalk outside, pedestrians streamed past, some glancing curiously at the pale woman being ejected from the building. Rebecca stood there, clutching her purse as tears of rage and helplessness blurred the Reed Development logo above the entrance. "He can't just erase me," she whispered to no one. "We exist." 2 months later, Rebecca sat in a crowded waiting room at Brooklyn Municipal Hospital, her hand resting on her now visible pregnancy bump. The morning had begun with spotting, bright red drops that had sent terror coursing through her. The clinic doctor had immediately referred her to the emergency room, his expression grave. After 4 hours of waiting, an ultrasound technician finally called her name. The gel was cold on her skin as the technician moved the wand across her abdomen, studying the screen with professional detachment. "Is my baby okay?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. The technician's expression softened. "Babies," she corrected gently. "And yes, they look perfectly healthy." "Babies?" Rebecca echoed. "As in, more than one?" "Twins," the technician confirmed, turning the screen. "See? 2 heartbeats, 2 little ones. Identical girls, from what I can tell." Rebecca stared at the fuzzy image, 2 distinct shapes pulsing with life. Not one baby, 2. 2 tiny humans depending entirely on her. That evening back in her dismal room, Rebecca stared at her bank account on her cracked phone screen. 212.47. Not enough for next month's rent, let alone preparing for twins. Her telemarketing job had ended predictably with a terse dismissal when her pregnancy became impossible to hide. The alterations work barely covered groceries. Sitting on her bed, surrounded by the few baby items she'd managed to find at thrift stores, 2 onesies, a small stuffed bear missing an eye, a single receiving blanket, Rebecca felt the walls of possibility closing in. For the first time since that fateful day in Maxwell's apartment, true despair threatened to overwhelm her determination. A knock at her door startled her from dark thoughts. Opening it revealed Ruth Goldstein, an elderly client for whom Rebecca had been altering vintage designer pieces. "You missed our appointment," Ruth said, taking in Rebecca's tear-stained face and the pathetic collection of baby items. "I was concerned." "I'm sorry," Rebecca began, embarrassed to be seen in such circumstances. "I had a doctor's appointment that ran long. I can finish your alterations tomorrow." Ruth waved away the apology, her shrewd eyes noting Rebecca's hollow cheeks and the emptiness of the room. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal, dear?" The question, asked with genuine concern rather than judgment, broke something in Rebecca. The tears she'd been fighting all day spilled over. "I don't remember," she admitted. Ruth's weathered hand gently took Rebecca's. "Come, my car is waiting downstairs." Too exhausted to resist, Rebecca found herself in an elegant town car, then seated at the table in Ruth's immaculate brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Over a simple but nourishing meal of soup and fresh bread, Rebecca's story poured out. Her design dreams, Maxwell's betrayal, the twins growing inside her, and her increasingly desperate circumstances. Ruth listened without interruption, her expression compassionate but evaluating. When Rebecca finished, the older woman nodded decisively. "My late husband Bernard always said that exceptional talent deserves exceptional opportunity," she said, rising with the grace of someone who had navigated New York high society for decades. "Come with me." Ruth led Rebecca down a flight of stairs to a spacious basement apartment with a separate entrance to the street. Unlike Rebecca's current squalid room, This space was clean, well-lit, and furnished simply but tastefully. "My housekeeper lived here until she retired to Florida last year," Ruth explained. "It's been empty since." Rebecca stared in wonder at the small kitchen, the actual bedroom separate from the living area, the bathroom with a real bathtub. "I couldn't possibly afford," she began. "Consider it an investment," Ruth interrupted firmly. "A talented designer with your determination won't stay down forever. One day, you'll make me proud." As Rebecca accepted the keys to the basement apartment, she couldn't possibly know that this moment of compassion would become the first piece of the empire that would one day bring Maxwell Reed to his knees. Ruth's kindness had given Rebecca shelter, but as her pregnancy progressed into its final months, she faced a challenge greater than anything she'd encountered before. At 7 months pregnant with twins, her body had transformed dramatically. Her once slender frame now carried a pronounced bump that made even simple movements exhausting. Each morning began with a silent ritual of determination, willing herself to rise, to face another day of uncertainty. "Just a few more weeks," she whispered to herself, massaging the stretched skin of her abdomen where 2 little lives tumbled and kicked with increasing vigor. The basement apartment in Ruth's brownstone had become a sanctuary, clean, safe, and mercifully private. Rebecca had transformed one corner into a makeshift sewing area where she continued taking in alterations, her fingers working deftly despite their swollen joints. The steady income wasn't much, but it allowed her to gradually accumulate essentials for the babies: second-hand onesies, cloth diapers, 2 small bassinets found at a church donation center. On a crisp October morning, Rebecca sat at her doctor's appointment, clutching the worn leather portfolio that contained her designs. Between appointments, she had been sketching new concepts: practical handbags with compartments specifically designed for the multitasking demands of motherhood. The irony wasn't lost on her that impending motherhood had sparked her most innovative work yet. "Rebecca Thompson?" the nurse called, interrupting her thoughts. The examination room was cold, the paper gown crinkling as Rebecca shifted uncomfortably on the table. Dr. Chen, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, studied the ultrasound monitor with focused attention. "Any more spotting since last visit?" she asked, moving the wand methodically. "No, but the pressure has increased. Sometimes it's hard to breathe." Dr. Chen nodded. "That's expected with twins. They're taking up all available real estate." She pointed to the screen. "Baby A is head down, which is good. Baby B is still transverse. We'll need to monitor this closely." Rebecca stared at the grainy images, 2 distinct profiles, 2 beating hearts. Are they healthy? Despite everything? The doctor understood the unspoken question. Despite stress, despite initial inadequate nutrition, despite the fact that their mother had slept on a bench in Grand Central Station during their first weeks of existence. "They're fighters," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But I'm concerned about you. Your blood pressure is elevated and you're still underweight for twin pregnancy. Do you have support for when they arrive? This won't be an easy delivery." Rebecca thought of Ruth, who had offered not just housing but friendship. Still, Ruth was in her 70s with her own health concerns. "I'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt. Dr. Chen's expression remained serious. "Rebecca, twin deliveries are complex even under ideal circumstances. I'm recommending hospital bed rest for the final 2 weeks. And you should prepare yourself. With your history, a C-section is likely." The subway ride back to Brooklyn was uncomfortable, the October chill seeping through Rebecca's second-hand maternity coat. Her mind raced with calculations: hospital costs, lost income from alterations, the impossibility of bed rest when there were preparations still to make. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Maxwell Reed was having a very different day. In the executive boardroom of Reed Development, champagne corks popped as executives celebrated the signing of their latest luxury development deal. "To Riverside Heights," William Reed announced, raising his glass to his son. "Maxwell's vision will transform the Upper West Side skyline." Maxwell accepted the congratulations with practiced charm, his tailored suit concealing the tension he carried in his shoulders. Since dismissing Rebecca from his life 7 months ago, he had thrown himself into work with renewed vigor, as if professional success could erase the memory of her devastated expression. "The mayor himself will attend the groundbreaking," Maxwell announced to appreciative murmurs, "and the Times is featuring the project in Sunday's real estate section." Later that evening, Maxwell stood in the VIP section of Club Prism, surrounded by models and socialites, a bottle of Cristal in an ice bucket beside him. His image had recently graced the society pages of the New York Observer under the headline, "Manhattan's Most Eligible Bachelor Builds His Empire." To continued success, toasted his friend Carter, an investment banker with family connections to old money, and to remaining gloriously unattached. Maxwell's laugh didn't quite reach his eyes as he clinked glasses. His phone buzzed with a text from a woman he'd met at a gallery opening last week, a Brazilian model with the right connections and impeccable style, perfect for the Reed family image his father so carefully cultivated. As dawn broke over the city the next morning, Maxwell slipped out of the model's Soho apartment, leaving before she woke, a pattern he had perfected. In the back of his town car, he scrolled through email, entirely unaware that across the East River, Rebecca was beginning what would become the most grueling 22 hours of her life. It started with a sudden gush of water as Rebecca was organizing baby clothes. One moment she was folding tiny socks, the next she was standing in a puddle, a sharp cramp seizing her lower back. "Too early," she gasped, fumbling for her phone. The twins weren't due for another 3 weeks. Ruth answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "The babies. They're coming. My water broke." Within 15 minutes, Ruth had arrived with her driver, helping Rebecca into the car. "Brooklyn Municipal?" the driver asked. Rebecca nodded through gritted teeth as another contraction ripped through her. The hospital where she had registered for Medicaid was far from luxurious, but it had a decent NICU if the twins needed special care. The labor progressed with agonizing slowness. Hours passed in a blur of pain, clinical lights, and the impersonal touch of changing shift nurses. Unlike the private birthing suites uptown where Maxwell's circle would deliver their heirs, Brooklyn Municipal's maternity ward was understaffed and overcrowded. "Where's your partner?" a nurse asked as she checked Rebecca's dilation. "It's just me," Rebecca replied, too exhausted to elaborate. Ruth remained steadfastly by her side, her weathered hand cool against Rebecca's feverish forehead. "You're doing beautifully," she encouraged. "You're stronger than you know." 12 hours in, complications arose. Baby A had descended properly, but baby B had shifted to a breech position. Rebecca's blood pressure spiked dangerously. "We need to prep for an emergency C-section," Dr. Chen announced, having been called in when Rebecca's condition deteriorated. Through the haze of pain and mounting fear, Rebecca heard phrases that sent terror through her. Fetal distress, maternal hemorrhage risk, NICU on standby. As they wheeled her toward surgery, Ruth squeezed her hand. "I'll be waiting. You and your daughters will be fine." The operating room was blindingly bright, the surgical team moving with practiced efficiency. As consciousness slipped away under anesthesia, Rebecca's last coherent thought was a desperate plea to whatever power might be listening. "Let them live, even if I don't." At that exact moment, Maxwell was standing at a podium in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, accepting an Urban Development Award. "The Reed legacy is built on vision," he told the assembled crowd of industry elites. "We don't just construct buildings, we create homes where futures unfold." The irony of his words would have been unbearable had he known what was happening in Brooklyn. Rebecca awakened hours later to the sterile beeping of monitors and the dull throb of surgical pain. Her first conscious thought was panic. Where were her babies? "They're here," came Ruth's gentle voice as if reading her mind. "Both girls are perfect, small but fighting." Tears of relief streamed down Rebecca's face as a nurse wheeled 2 clear bassinets closer to her bed. Inside each lay a tiny bundle, impossibly small yet complete. Identical faces, wispy dark hair, miniature fingers curled into determined fists. "Emma," Rebecca whispered, reaching toward the bassinet on the left, "and Olivia." The names she had chosen weeks ago now belonged to real people, her daughters. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, and 5 pounds even, the nurse reported. "Excellent weights for twins at 37 weeks. You did well, Mama." As Rebecca gazed at her daughters, a fierce love unlike anything she had ever experienced washed over her. These perfect beings had come from her body, had grown beneath her heart. They were hers, completely and irrevocably. With Ruth's help, she managed to sit up slightly, wincing at the pull of stitches across her abdomen. "Can I hold them?" The nurse carefully placed first Emma, then Olivia in the crook of Rebecca's arms. The weight of them together, the warmth of their tiny bodies against her chest, the soft, snuffling sounds they made, it was overwhelming in its perfection. In that moment, looking down at her daughters' faces, Rebecca made a silent, unbreakable vow. "You will never know what it feels like to be treated as disposable. I will build an empire so vast that the man who rejected us will have to look up to see us. And when that day comes, he will understand exactly what he threw away." 3 days later, Rebecca brought her daughters home to the basement apartment, now equipped with the essentials Ruth had helped purchase. The first night was a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and moments of sheer panic whenever one of the twins made an unfamiliar sound. Between caring for the newborns, Rebecca continued sketching. With the twins sleeping in their bassinets beside her, she refined her designs for what would become her first marketable product. A versatile, elegant handbag with specialized compartments for every necessity a working mother might need. Ruth visited daily, bringing meals and offering to hold the babies while Rebecca showered or napped. "You're already designing again?" she asked one afternoon, finding Rebecca at her makeshift desk, sketching while Emma and Olivia slept. "I have to," Rebecca replied simply. "These designs aren't just accessories anymore. They're our future." Picking up a completed sketch of a convertible diaper bag that could transform into a professional-looking tote, Ruth studied it with appreciative eyes. "Bernard used to say you can always spot true talent by its persistence in adversity. He would have invested in you in a heartbeat." Rebecca looked up from her drawing, determination hardening her exhausted features. "One day, Ruth, I'm going to build something so significant that no one will ever again mistake my worth." As Ruth gazed at the sleeping twins and their fiercely focused mother, she had no doubt this was true. While Maxwell Reed celebrated his superficial success in the glittering towers of Manhattan, he remained oblivious to the true miracle he had rejected. Not just 2 perfect daughters, but a woman whose determination would soon reshape the very landscape he thought he dominated. While she watched over her daughter's peaceful sleep, Rebecca didn't know that her executive mother bag would become the first product in a line that, in just 5 years, would be coveted by celebrities and CEOs across the country. 3 years passed in a blur of sleepless nights, first words, and tentative steps. Rebecca's world had contracted to the circumference of her daughter's needs, then gradually expanded as she built something remarkable from the basement of Ruth's Brooklyn brownstone. On a bright spring morning, 3-year-old Emma and Olivia played on the floor of what had evolved from a simple basement apartment into a functioning studio. The space had transformed as surely as Rebecca herself had, from a desperate refuge to the birthplace of what she now confidently called Thompson Design. "Blue goes here," Emma declared, meticulously organizing fabric scraps by color while her sister watched. Though identical in appearance, the twins had developed distinctly different personalities. Emma, older by 8 minutes, approached the world with analytical precision, creating order from chaos with her tiny hands. "I like the red ones better," Olivia countered, gathering crimson swatches into her arms before turning to her collection of dolls. "This bag costs $1,000 because it's special," she announced, mimicking her mother's professional tone with uncanny accuracy as she sold a scrap of fabric to a one-eyed teddy bear. Rebecca smiled as she worked, needle flashing in the natural light that now streamed through the enlarged basement windows. A renovation Ruth had insisted upon as Rebecca's designs gained traction. The twins had become not just the center of her personal life but unwitting collaborators in her professional rebirth. "Mommy, is this straight?" Emma asked, holding up a perfectly aligned row of buttons. "Perfect, sweetheart," Rebecca answered, pausing to admire her daughter's work. At 37 months, Emma showed an attention to detail that astonished even Ruth. The phone rang, interrupting the peaceful scene. Rebecca answered, tucking it between her ear and shoulder as she continued stitching. "Thompson Design," she answered, the professionalism in her voice a stark contrast to her surroundings. Toys scattered across the floor, half-finished prototypes hanging from every available surface. "Ms. Thompson? This is Elaine Winters from Tessuto Boutique in Soho. We've sold out of your convertible totes. Our customers are asking when we'll have more." Rebecca's hands stilled. Tessuto was the first upscale boutique to take a chance on her design 6 months ago, after Ruth had leveraged old connections to secure a meeting with the owner. "I can have another dozen ready by Friday," Rebecca promised, mentally calculating how many nights she'd need to work after the twins were asleep. "Make it 2 dozen, Elaine replied. "And bring some of those new diaper bags that don't look like diaper bags. A customer from Vogue mentioned them." After hanging up, Rebecca sat motionless, absorbing the significance of the moment. A customer from Vogue. It wasn't a feature or even a mention in the magazine itself, but it was a thread of connection to the world she'd once dreamed of entering. "Good news?" Ruth asked from the doorway, where she stood with a basket of freshly baked muffins. "Tessuto wants more bags, double the order," Rebecca explained, emotion catching in her throat. "And apparently someone from Vogue likes my designs." Ruth smiled knowingly. "I told you it would happen. Talent always finds its audience." The twins abandoned their play at the sight of Ruth, rushing to hug her legs and investigate the basket she carried. At 3, they adored the elegant older woman who had become the closest thing to a grandmother they would ever know. "Ruthie, did you bring blueberry?" Olivia asked, peering into the basket. "Of course, and cranberry orange for Emma, who thinks blueberries are too messy," Ruth answered, lowering herself carefully to their level. At 75, her movements were slower, but her mind remained sharp as ever. Later that afternoon, Rebecca sat on a bench at the local playground, sketching in her notebook while watching the twins navigate the sandbox. These stolen moments of creative work had become precious. She designed wherever and whenever she could, between feedings and baths, during playground visits and doctor's appointments. A woman approached, admiring the distinctive bag beside Rebecca on the bench. "Excuse me, is that the new Thompson bag? I've been on the waiting list at Tessuto for weeks." Rebecca looked up, momentarily startled. "Yes, it is," she admitted. "I'm Rebecca Thompson, actually." The woman's eyes widened. "Really? Your designs are incredible, so functional but still elegant. Nothing else on the market compares for working mothers." As they chatted, more women drifted over, curious about the bag and its designer. By the time Rebecca gathered the twins to leave, she had taken contact information from 5 potential customers and received an invitation to present her work at a local mothers' networking group. Walking home with a twin holding each hand, Rebecca felt something long dormant stirring inside her. Hope, not just for survival, but for true success. 2 weeks later, Rebecca sat across from a bank manager, her business plans spread between them on the polished desk. The contrast between them was stark, his crisp suit and skeptical expression against her carefully mended blouse and determined gaze. "Ms. Thompson, I appreciate your thoroughness," he began, tapping the business plan. "But without credit history or collateral, this is a difficult loan to approve." Single motherhood also raises concerns about your ability to focus on business development. Rebecca's spine stiffened at the familiar dismissal. With respect, Mr. Daniels, my focus is precisely why you should approve this loan. I've built a wait list of over 200 customers while working from a basement with twin toddlers. Imagine what I could accomplish with proper funding and manufacturing capabilities. She slid across a folder containing press clippings, a small but significant mention in New York Magazine about her revolutionary approach to functional fashion, and several blog features by influential mommy bloggers. My daughters aren't a limitation, they're my inspiration. They've driven me to create solutions for problems the fashion industry has ignored for decades. The manager's expression remained dubious, but something in Rebecca's unwavering confidence gave him pause. I'll need to speak with the loan committee, but I'll present your case as favorably as I can. As Rebecca left the bank, uncertainty gnawed at her. Without the loan, expansion beyond her current small-scale production would be impossible. Orders were already exceeding what she could personally manufacture, even working 14-hour days. On the other side of Manhattan, in the gleaming offices of Reed Development, Maxwell Reed was facing challenges of a very different nature. Standing in his father's former office, now his since William Reed's unexpected heart attack 3 months ago, Maxwell studied the financial reports with growing concern. These projections for the Chicago development can't be right, he told his CFO. My father assured me the financing was secured before he died. The older man shifted uncomfortably. William kept certain irregularities from the board. The financing has significant conditions we may not be able to meet under current market conditions. Maxwell struggled to process the implications. His father, the titan of real estate he'd spent his life trying to emulate, had been hiding financial problems. The Reed empire, which Maxwell had always assumed was unassailable, showed cracks in its foundation. "We'll find a solution," Maxwell declared with more confidence than he felt. "The Reed name still means something in this city." His assistant interrupted with a gentle knock. "Your date called to confirm dinner at Le Bernardin, and your mother wants to know if you're bringing anyone to the Philharmonic Gala next weekend." Maxwell nodded absently, his mind still on the troubling figures before him. At 35, he remained Manhattan's golden bachelor, cycling through appropriate socialites and models who complemented his public image. None had lasted longer than a few months. None had affected him the way. He shut down the thought before it fully formed. Rebecca Thompson was ancient history, a mistake he'd corrected before it could derail his life. He never allowed himself to wonder what had happened to her or the pregnancy she'd claimed was his. Such sentimentality was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially now with his father gone and the company's future squarely on his shoulders. "Tell my mother I'll attend alone," he instructed. "I need to focus on the Chicago situation." Back in Brooklyn, Rebecca returned to the basement apartment to find the twins' finger painting under Ruth's watchful eye. The floor was protected by newspaper, but multicolored handprints decorated the girls' faces and clothes. "Any luck at the bank?" Ruth asked quietly while the girls were absorbed in their masterpieces. "He'll present it to the committee," Rebecca sighed. "But I'm not holding my breath." Ruth studied her young friend thoughtfully. "You know, Bernard's insurance policy is just sitting in investments. A small portion of it could—" "No," Rebecca interrupted gently but firmly. "You've done so much already. This has to be my journey, Ruth. I need to build this myself." "Mommy, look!" Olivia called, holding up a paint-smeared paper. "I made our store!" Rebecca knelt beside her daughter, examining the colorful chaos that somehow did suggest a shop. "Our store?" "Where we sell the special bags," Olivia explained with the certainty only a 3-year-old could muster. "It's called Thompson because that's us." Emma looked up from her own more methodical creation. "Can we have a big sign with lights? And a computer for me?" Rebecca gathered both paint-covered children into her arms, heedless of the mess. "Someday," she promised, "Thompson Design will have the biggest, brightest sign in all of New York." That night, After tucking the twins into their shared bed, they still refused to sleep separately despite having their own beds. Rebecca worked until her eyes burned, completing orders and refining new designs. The bank loan remained uncertain, but something about Olivia's childish declaration had rekindled her determination. When her phone rang near midnight, Rebecca answered with trepidation, expecting an emergency from one of her few babysitters or perhaps Ruth. "Rebecca Thompson?" an unfamiliar voice asked. "Speaking." "This is Lisa Chen from New York Magazine. We featured your diaper bags last month in our local finds section." Rebecca's heart raced. "Yes, I remember. Thank you for that. I'm working on a feature about entrepreneurial mothers reinventing traditional industries. Your story, single mother of twins creating revolutionary accessories, is exactly what we're looking for. Would you be available for an interview and photo shoot?" 3 days after the magazine hit newsstands, featuring Rebecca and the twins in their basement studio, the bank called to approve her loan. The accompanying text message from Mr. Daniels was telling, "The loan committee was impressed by your New York Magazine feature. Congratulations." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in a small storefront in Brooklyn, watching as the twins helped Ruth arrange fabric swatches by color and texture. The space was modest compared to Manhattan boutiques, but it was clean, bright, and most importantly, it belonged to Thompson Design officially. As she hung the small but proud Thompson Design sign in the window, Rebecca couldn't possibly know that in just 7 years that name would appear in neon lights in 5 world capitals and in the most exclusive investment portfolios on Wall Street. The Thompson Design sign gleamed in the morning light as Rebecca locked the door of her Brooklyn storefront. The past 3 years had been a whirlwind of growth, transforming her basement operation into a legitimate business with 5 part-time employees and a clientele that extended beyond New York. Now 30 years old, Rebecca carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built something substantial from nothing. "Ready for Boston?" Ruth asked, waiting by the car with 6-year-old Emma and Olivia dressed in matching blue dresses Rebecca had designed herself. "As ready as we'll ever be," Rebecca replied, checking her portfolio one last time. The tech convention wasn't her usual venue. Her bags had found their market primarily through boutiques and word of mouth among professional mothers. But Ruth's nephew, who worked in product development at Microsoft, had insisted she showcase her latest prototype at the Innovation Showcase. "It's not just a bag, Rebecca," he had explained. "What you've created is technology integration in its purest form." The twins climbed into Ruth's comfortable sedan, already engaged in their own distinct activities. Emma with a puzzle book far beyond her grade level, Olivia rehearsing her practiced pitch to an imaginary audience. "My mommy makes bags that charge your phone while you walk," she declared to her stuffed rabbit with surprising eloquence for a 6-year-old. The drive to Boston took nearly 4 hours, during which Rebecca reviewed her presentation materials. The prototype, a sleek messenger bag with built-in conductive fabric that harvested kinetic energy from movement, represented months of late-night experimentation after the twins were asleep. She had no formal engineering training, just a designer's intuition and countless hours of research. The convention center buzzed with activity, dominated by established tech companies with elaborate displays and uniformed representatives. Rebecca's modest booth sat in a back corner of the Emerging Innovations section, her prototype bags displayed on a simple table draped with a black cloth. "Not exactly prime real estate," Ruth observed, helping arrange the display while the twins explored the nearby booths under Rebecca's watchful eye. "We're lucky to be here at all," Rebecca replied, straightening her most affordable blazer, still a far cry from the designer wear of other presenters. For the first 2 hours, attendees streamed past Rebecca's booth with barely a glance. Occasionally, someone would pause, examine a bag with mild curiosity, then move on to the flashier displays from recognized brands. The twins remained remarkably patient, Emma reading quietly while Olivia charmed the occasional visitor with rehearsed facts about their mother's designs. "The fabric generates electricity from motion," she would explain, her small face serious, "so you never run out of battery." By mid-afternoon, Rebecca's hopes had dimmed considerably. The convention had been an expensive gamble: travel costs, booth rental, production of prototypes, with apparently little return. "Perhaps we should pack up early," Ruth suggested gently. "The girls are getting tired." Before Rebecca could respond, a man in a crisp blue shirt with a Microsoft badge stopped at their booth, picking up one of the messenger bags with professional curiosity. "Interesting texture," he commented, running his fingers over the specialized fabric. "What's the material?" Rebecca launched into her practiced explanation, demonstrating how the bag's fabric captured energy from normal movement and transferred it to a power cell that could charge mobile devices. The man listened politely, examining the internal wiring with increasing interest. "And you developed this yourself?" "She did it in our apartment," Emma interjected unexpectedly, looking up from her book. "The energy conversion is more efficient than similar systems because Mom incorporated conductive threading at 45-degree angles instead of the standard grid pattern." The man blinked in surprise, looking from the serious 6-year-old to Rebecca. "Your daughter is correct," Rebecca confirmed with a proud smile. "The diagonal weave increases energy capture by approximately 23%. Emma understands the technical aspects better than I do sometimes," she added. "She has a gift for patterns and systems." The Microsoft executive, for that's what his badge identified him as, crouched to Emma's level. "Would you mind explaining how the power transfer works?" Without hesitation, Emma detailed the process with remarkable clarity, using vocabulary no ordinary 6-year-old should possess. By the time she finished, a small crowd had gathered, including several other tech executives attracted by the unusual sight of a child explaining advanced energy capture systems. "This isn't just a novel accessory," the Microsoft executive said, standing to address Rebecca. "This is potentially revolutionary fabric technology. Have you patented this?" Rebecca hesitated. "I've filed preliminary paperwork, but the full patent process is expensive." "You need to complete it immediately," he advised, handing her his business card. "I'd like to bring some colleagues by tomorrow for a more detailed demonstration. Microsoft might be very interested in licensing this technology." After the convention hall closed for the day, Rebecca sat with Ruth and the twins in their modest hotel room, still processing the dramatic shift in their fortunes. "He really thinks it could be worth millions?" Ruth asked, helping the girls into their pajamas. "He mentioned potential applications beyond bags: clothing, furniture, even building materials that could generate and store energy," Rebecca replied, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Things I hadn't even considered." 3 weeks later, Rebecca sat in a gleaming conference room at a Manhattan law firm, surrounded by patent attorneys and Microsoft representatives. The licensing agreement before her represented more money than she had ever imagined possessing: $7 million up front with ongoing royalties for commercial applications of her conductive fabric technology. "By signing today, you're granting Microsoft non-exclusive rights to develop products using your patented energy-capturing fabric," the lead attorney explained. "You retain ownership of the patent and can continue developing your own applications or license to other companies." Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she signed each page, remembering nights hunched over her sewing machine, experimenting with conductive threads while the twins slept nearby. The same hands that had once counted out coins to buy baby formula were now signing documents worth millions. Outside the law firm, Ruth waited with the twins, her eyes bright with unshed tears as Rebecca emerged. "Well?" she asked softly. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Emma, perceptive as always, took her mother's hand. "Are we rich now?" she asked pragmatically. Rebecca laughed, the tension breaking. "We're secure," she corrected, "and we can build something even better than before." 1 month later, Rebecca stood in a sun-filled office space in San Francisco's Soma district, watching as Emma and Olivia explored what would become the headquarters of Thompson Design Innovations. The tech-centered city offered advantages that New York couldn't match: proximity to manufacturing partners, a culture that embraced innovation and a fresh start away from painful memories. "What do you think?" she asked the twins, who had been solemnly inspecting every corner of the potential headquarters. "It has the best light for creating," Emma observed, measuring the angle of sunlight through the western windows. "And it's close to that ice cream place we saw," Olivia added practically. Ruth, who had accompanied them on this trip despite her doctor's concerns about the travel, smiled from her seat by the realtor. "Bernard would say this space has good energy. He always claimed you could feel it when you walked into the right place for a business." As the twins continued their exploration, Rebecca's phone chimed with a news alert, one she had set up years ago but rarely triggered. The headline made her breath catch. "Reed Development Chicago project collapses amid financing concerns." The accompanying photo showed Maxwell Reed outside the Chicago courthouse, his face tense as reporters thrust microphones toward him. Though still handsome, his features showed strain that hadn't been present when Rebecca knew him. The article detailed the spectacular failure of Reed Development's ambitious Chicago project. Structural issues discovered mid-construction, lawsuits from investors, and rumors of corner-cutting to save costs. "Bad news?" Ruth asked, noticing Rebecca's expression. Rebecca closed the notification, pushing away the complicated emotions it stirred. "Nothing relevant to us," she replied, focusing instead on the bright space that represented her future. That evening, in their hotel suite, Rebecca tucked the twins into bed, their excitement about the new city making bedtime a greater challenge than usual. "Will we have our own rooms in our new house?" Olivia asked, always the first to consider the practical benefits of their changing circumstances. "Yes, you'll each have your own bedroom," Rebecca confirmed, "though you can still have sleepovers whenever you want." Emma, who had been unusually quiet, finally voiced the question Rebecca had been expecting. "Mom, now that we're moving to a new city, can you tell us more about our dad?" Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her thoughts. She had always been honest with the twins about their father in age-appropriate ways, explaining that he hadn't been ready to be a parent when they were born. She had intentionally omitted the cruelest details of his rejection, allowing them to form their own conclusions. "Your father lives in New York," she said carefully. "He comes from a wealthy family and works in real estate development." "Does he know about us?" Olivia asked, her usual confidence momentarily vulnerable. "He knows I was pregnant," Rebecca answered truthfully, "but he made it clear he wasn't prepared for family life." "Does he ever ask about us?" Emma's analytical mind went straight to the practical question. Rebecca hesitated, unwilling to lie but equally unwilling to burden them with the full, painful truth. "We haven't been in contact since before you were born. His choice, not mine." "Is that why we're Thompson and not his name?" Olivia wondered. "Yes, Thompson is my name, and since I'm the one who's been here loving you and raising you, it seemed right that you should share it." Later, after the twins had finally drifted to sleep, Rebecca stood at the hotel window overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city lights reflected on the dark water, so different from the Manhattan skyline that had once represented all her dreams. In her hand, she held her phone, the article about Maxwell's failing project still open. She had built something extraordinary from the ruins of his rejection, not just a successful company, but a life filled with purpose and love. The twins were thriving, brilliant beyond their years and secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. Yet seeing Maxwell's face, older, strained but still recognizable, had stirred something she thought long buried. Not love or longing, but a complicated mixture of vindication and unexpected pity. The empire he had chosen over her and their daughters was showing cracks, while hers was just beginning to reveal its true potential. As Rebecca inaugurated the headquarters of Thompson Design Innovations in San Francisco, she didn't realize that her meteoric rise had already caught the attention of the New York financial press, including an article that would soon reach the trembling hands of Maxwell Reed. The article about Maxwell's failing Chicago project found its way into Rebecca's archived email folder, joining dozens of others she had collected over the years. Not out of obsession, she told herself, but as a form of business intelligence. 5 years had passed since that pivotal day in San Francisco when Thompson Design Innovations had established its headquarters, and the company had experienced growth that even Rebecca's ambitious business plan hadn't fully anticipated. Rebecca stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office on the 32nd floor of the Thompson Tower in San Francisco, watching the fog roll in from the bay. At 35, she carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of success. Designer clothing that once seemed an impossible luxury now constituted her daily wardrobe, her chestnut hair cut in an elegant bob that framed features no longer thinned by worry. "Mom, the marketing team needs your approval on the Tokyo campaign," Emma announced, entering without knocking, a privilege granted only to her and her sister. At 11, Emma had grown into her analytical mind with remarkable poise. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her tablet clutched to her chest like another child might hold a teddy bear. Though she wore the Thompson Academy uniform, the private school Rebecca had founded specifically to nurture gifted children like her daughters, Emma's bearing suggested a corporate executive in miniature. "Already? I thought the presentation wasn't until 4, Rebecca replied, checking her watch, a subtle Patek Philippe that had been a gift to herself when Thompson Design reached its first billion in valuation. Olivia convinced them to move it up. She said their concept lacked proper understanding of the Asian luxury market and made them revise it twice already. Emma's tone conveyed equal parts exasperation and admiration for her twin's boldness. Rebecca suppressed a smile. While Emma's genius manifested in programming and systems analysis, Olivia had developed an uncanny instinct for marketing and human psychology. Together, the twins had become Thompson Design's secret weapons, their youth belying extraordinary capabilities that had ceased to surprise the company's executives years ago. "I'll be right there," Rebecca promised, gathering her tablet and the custom stylus Emma had programmed with biometric recognition. The boardroom buzzed with nervous energy as Rebecca entered, Olivia already seated at the table's right side, offering pointed critiques to the marketing team's revised presentation. Unlike her sister's practical ponytail, Olivia wore her hair in a fashionable style featured in last month's Teen Vogue, where she had been profiled as a fashion prodigy reshaping tomorrow's trends. "The font choice still doesn't resonate with Tokyo's aesthetic sensibilities," Olivia was saying, her voice carrying the gentle but unmistakable authority she had inherited from her mother. "It reads Western corporation trying to look Japanese rather than global brand that understands nuance." The marketing director, a veteran poached from Apple 2 years prior, nodded without hesitation, making notes. The scene might have seemed comical to outsiders, an 11-year-old girl directing professionals 3 times her age. But within Thompson Design, the twins' contributions had long since proven invaluable. "Perhaps we should move forward with the presentation," Rebecca suggested, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Olivia can continue her consultation afterward." The presentation showcased Thompson Design's expansion into the Japanese market, not just with their established line of tech-integrated fashion, but with the revolutionary new smart fabric that could adjust its thermal properties based on body temperature and environmental conditions. It represented the culmination of research Rebecca had initiated 4 years ago, refined by Emma's programming insights and Olivia's consumer psychology analysis. The potential market share exceeds initial projections by 17%, the CFO concluded, displaying a graph of exponential growth. Between Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, first-year revenue estimates now approach 500 million. After the meeting, Rebecca retreated to her office with the twins, their evening ritual of reviewing the day's achievements uninterrupted despite their packed schedules. "Your input was excellent, Olivia, but remember that professionals need to save face," Rebecca advised gently. "Sometimes it's more effective to lead them to your conclusion rather than stating it outright." Olivia nodded, absorbing the lesson without defensiveness. Like you did with that venture capital firm last month, when you made them think investing $200 million was their idea? Rebecca laughed. Exactly like that. Emma looked up from her tablet. Fortune magazine just released their 40 under 40 list. You're number 3, Mom. Up from 7 last year, Olivia noted with satisfaction. Who beat you? The Tesla executive and that software developer who created the pandemic prediction algorithm, Emma reported. But the article says you're the most inspiring story of the decade because you built your empire as a single mother. Rebecca accepted this news with a measured smile, though inside a small flame of vindication burned brighter. Each recognition, each milestone, each decimal point added to Thompson Design's valuation served as silent rebuttal to the cruel dismissal she had endured in Maxwell's Tribeca apartment all those years ago. Speaking of which, Olivia began, her tone shifting to the careful neutrality she adopted when broaching sensitive topics. Liam Anderson asked about our father during advanced economics yesterday. Rebecca stilled, her expression carefully composed. Liam was the son of a prominent venture capitalist whose family moved in the same elite circles that Maxwell once had. What prompted that? She asked calmly. We were discussing inherited traits in business aptitude, Emma explained. He said his father claims you must have strategic genes from somewhere since you built such a successful company. And what did you say? Rebecca asked, curious how her daughters navigated these increasingly frequent inquiries as they entered the wider world of their privileged school. I told him genetics are complex and multifactorial, Emma replied practically, and that environment and determination are statistically more significant predictors of success than parentage. I told him our mom built a billion-dollar company while our father couldn't even build the courage to meet us, Olivia added with characteristic directness. That shut him up. Rebecca felt the familiar twist of emotions, pride in her daughter's resilience, sorrow for what they'd been denied, and the ever-present determination that had fueled her rise. Your father wasn't ready for the responsibility. She repeated the carefully edited truth she had maintained since they were old enough to ask. Sometimes it's better to have one fully committed parent than 2 half-committed ones. The following morning, Rebecca sat for a photo shoot in her office, the backdrop of San Francisco's skyline providing the perfect setting for her cover feature in Forbes magazine. The photographer, a celebrated portrait artist who typically photographed heads of state, directed her through a series of poses that emphasized both authority and accessibility. Perfect, he declared, reviewing the digital images. You project strength without severity. That's rare in tech CEOs. The accompanying interview delved into Rebecca's journey from struggling single mother to tech fashion mogul, though she carefully steered the conversation away from the twins' paternity. The world knew Emma and Olivia as the brilliant Thompson heirs, their father's identity a deliberately maintained mystery that fueled occasional society gossip but never affected the family's carefully constructed narrative. Thompson Design Innovations has revolutionized how we think about wearable technology, the journalist noted, recording Rebecca's responses. Did you envision this level of success when you started? Rebecca considered the question, thinking back to those early days in Ruth's basement, sewing while the twins napped. I knew the potential was there, but the scale of what we've built exceeds even my ambitious plans. What began as practical solutions for working mothers evolved into a technology platform that's reshaping multiple industries. The truth, which Rebecca kept private, was more pointed. She had envisioned precisely this level of success, had determined to achieve it specifically because Maxwell had deemed her incapable. Each innovation, each expansion, each breakthrough had been fueled partly by the need to prove his dismissal catastrophically wrong. Across the country, in his significantly reduced office in the Reed Development headquarters, Maxwell Reed studied the same Forbes list that had ranked Rebecca third among entrepreneurs under 40. His own name, once a fixture in such publications, was notably absent. At 43, he had aged visibly beyond his years, the pressure of salvaging his family's crumbling empire etched into the lines around his eyes. "Sir, the bank called again about the Miami financing," his assistant said hesitantly from the doorway. "They're requesting a meeting with the full board." Maxwell waved her away, his attention fixed on the article about Rebecca Thompson, accompanied by a striking photo of her standing confidently before the Thompson Design logo. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, something he had spent years trying not to recognize whenever her company made headlines. The same evening, Rebecca received a call from Ruth, now 83 and residing in the luxury senior living facility Rebecca had insisted on financing. "I just saw your Forbes feature," Ruth said, her voice still strong despite her advancing years. "Bernard would have been so proud. I certainly am." "None of it would have happened without you," Rebecca reminded her, the debt of gratitude one she never forgot despite her success. "Nonsense. I provided shelter and encouragement, but you built this empire yourself, brick by brick, stitch by stitch." After the call, Rebecca joined the twins for dinner in their penthouse apartment overlooking the bay. As they discussed their day, Emma's breakthrough with a new algorithm, Olivia's presentation to the Junior Achievement Society, Rebecca's phone chimed with an unexpected notification. "What is it?" Olivia asked, noticing her mother's expression change. "An invitation," Rebecca replied, scanning the email, "to be the keynote speaker at next month's New York Innovation Week." "New York?" Emma's interest was immediately piqued. "We were born there, but we've never been back." "Is it time?" Olivia asked perceptively, understanding the significance of such a return. "To go back to where it all started?" Rebecca considered the question, running her finger over the embossed Thompson logo on her phone case. New York represented both her greatest pain and the beginning of her most significant triumph. She had avoided it deliberately, building her empire from the opposite coast, as if geographic distance could somehow diminish the emotional impact of those early wounds. "Maybe it is," she finally decided. "After all, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success witnessed by those who doubted you." "Can we see where we lived?" Emma asked. "Where you started the company?" "And the restaurant where you met our father?" Olivia added, ever direct. Rebecca nodded slowly, a decision crystallizing. "Yes to all of it. It's time you saw where your story began." As she accepted the invitation to return to the city that had nearly destroyed her, Rebecca couldn't know that in just a few days she would be face to face with the man who had abandoned her, now desperate for her help to save what remained of his crumbling empire. "Maybe it is," she finally decided. "After all, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success witnessed by those who doubted you." The words hung in the air of Rebecca's penthouse as she gazed out at the San Francisco skyline, the invitation to New York Innovation Week still displayed on her phone. Something about returning to the city that had both broken and forged her felt like closing a circle that had remained open for 15 years. 3 weeks later, Rebecca's private jet began its descent toward LaGuardia Airport. The sleek, custom-designed aircraft, its interior featuring the same energy-harvesting fabric that had made Thompson Design a household name, represented how far she had traveled from that snowy night when she'd slept on a bench in Grand Central Station. "Look! You can see the whole city!" Olivia pressed her face against the window, the Manhattan skyline sprawling beneath them. At 15, she retained the enthusiasm that had characterized her since childhood, though now channeled through the polished demeanor she'd cultivated as the public face of Thompson Design's youth division. Emma looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing data on the New York tech ecosystem. Statistically, Manhattan has the highest concentration of venture capital per square mile in the world, she observed, always connecting emotion to analysis. "It's fascinating to think that 15 years ago, Mom couldn't even get a small business loan here." Rebecca smiled at her daughters, a profound sense of satisfaction washing over her. They were returning not as supplicants to the city that had rejected them, but as conquering royalty. The Thompson name now opened doors that had once been firmly closed. "The plaza has prepared the presidential suite," Rebecca's executive assistant noted as the wheels touched down. "Security has already swept the premises and the conference organizers sent over the final schedule. You're the headline event, of course." The motorcade of black SUVs waiting on the tarmac whisked them efficiently into Manhattan, a stark contrast to Rebecca's last departure, a Greyhound bus to Brooklyn, pregnant and heartbroken, 15 years before. "Is that where you used to work?" Emma asked as they passed a high-end restaurant. "No, 11 Madison Park is a few blocks from here," Rebecca replied, a slight tightening in her chest the only indication of the memories the name evoked. "We'll pass it later if you want to see it." The Plaza Hotel's staff formed a reception line as the Thompson entourage entered, the general manager stepping forward with practiced deference. "Ms. Thompson, it's an honor to have you with us again." Rebecca paused, momentarily confused. "Again?" The manager consulted his tablet. "According to our records, you stayed with us briefly 15 years ago. Just one night, in our reception area, I believe." The memory hit Rebecca with unexpected force. The night after Maxwell had thrown her out, when she'd spent her last dollars on a hotel room, unable to face her roommates. She'd sat in the plaza's ornate reception area until dawn, too numb with shock to even cry. "That's correct," she said smoothly, refusing to show how the casual reference had affected her. "My circumstances have improved somewhat since then." In the presidential suite, Rebecca watched as the twins explored the opulent space, marveling at the view of Central Park spread beneath them like an emerald carpet. Their excitement was infectious, reminding her that despite their extraordinary intelligence and poise, they were still teenagers experiencing their first visit to the city of their birth. "Can we see where we used to live?" Olivia asked, echoing the request she'd made when the invitation first arrived. Rebecca checked her watch, an afternoon gap in their schedule before the welcome reception that evening. "We have a few hours. Let's take a little tour." The limousine carried them to the Lower East Side, where Rebecca directed the driver to stop before a nondescript apartment building. The neighborhood had transformed dramatically. Gentrification had replaced the gritty character Rebecca remembered with upscale boutiques and artisanal coffee shops. "This is where I lived when I first met your father," she explained as they gazed up at the fifth-floor windows. "I shared it with 3 roommates and worked 3 jobs to afford my portion of the rent." Emma studied the building with analytical precision. "It looks small for 4 adults." "It was," Rebecca confirmed. "My entire bedroom was roughly the size of your closet at home." Olivia, ever pragmatic about human connections, asked the question Rebecca had been anticipating since their arrival. "Is the restaurant where you met him far from here?" "Actually, it's just 2 blocks away," Rebecca admitted, having deliberately chosen their route. The decision to pass by 11 Madison Park was impulsive but felt necessary, a way to reclaim a space that had been tainted by painful beginnings. The restaurant looked much the same, its elegant facade a stark reminder of the hopeful young woman who had once served tables inside, dreams as vast as her bank account was empty. "You were a server there?" Emma asked, trying to reconcile the image of her powerhouse mother with the role of waitress. "I was," Rebecca confirmed. "It's where I met your father. He was dining with business associates and corrected the sommelier about a wine selection. He left his number with a $500 tip." "Trying to impress you with money from the start," Olivia observed shrewdly. Rebecca smiled at her daughter's perception. "Yes, though I didn't recognize it as a warning sign then." As they returned to the limousine, Rebecca's phone chimed with a notification about a last-minute change to the conference schedule. "That's odd," she murmured, scanning the update. "They've added a new panelist to the executive roundtable, the president of the East Coast Technology Development Association." Emma, already pulling up the information on her tablet, frowned slightly. "Maxwell Reed? I don't recall seeing his name in any of the tech industry publications." Rebecca froze, the name hitting her like a physical blow. It couldn't be coincidence. Not with the timing, not with the specific panel that would follow her keynote address. "Mom?" Olivia's perceptive gaze caught the momentary lapse in her mother's composure. "Do you know him?" Rebecca composed herself quickly, years of boardroom negotiations having taught her to mask even the most intense emotions. "I met him once, a long time ago. He's primarily in real estate development, not technology. It's an unusual addition." Emma, still scanning information on her tablet, added, "According to this, the Reed Development Group has been attempting to pivot to smart building technology for the past 2 years, with limited success. Their last 3 projects have faced significant financial and structural challenges." Rebecca absorbed this information with a strange sense of detachment. Of course, Maxwell would be floundering. The real estate market had evolved beyond the old Reed model of luxury developments. Of course, he would be seeking connections to technology innovators. And of course, he would insert himself into a conference where she was the headliner. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. "Should we request that he be removed from the panel?" her assistant asked, noting Rebecca's extended silence. "No," Rebecca decided, a calm determination settling over her. "Make no changes, but have the legal team send over the full dossier on Reed Development's current financial position. I want to be thoroughly prepared." That evening, as Rebecca dressed for the welcome reception, she studied her reflection with critical precision. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the desperate girl who had last been in New York. Designer dress highlighting a figure kept toned by regular workouts, jewelry selected for subtle signaling of wealth rather than flash, hair and makeup emphasizing strength rather than conventional beauty. She was no longer the Rebecca who could be dismissed or discarded. "Mom, are you ready?" Olivia called from the suite's living room. "Emma says we'll be exactly 7 minutes late if we don't leave now, which is apparently the optimal time to arrive for maximum impact." Rebecca smiled at her daughter's complimentary approaches, Emma calculating the precise timing for effective entrances, Olivia intuitively understanding the social dynamics of fashionable lateness. The reception buzzed with the energy of tech elites and financial power brokers converging. As the Thompson trio entered, a visible ripple moved through the crowd, recognition, respect, and curiosity following them like a wake. Rebecca navigated the space with practiced ease, introducing the twins to key industry figures while fielding questions about her upcoming keynote. "Ms. Thompson, your presence has elevated the entire conference," gushed the event chairwoman. "Ticket sales doubled when your participation was announced." "We're delighted to be here," Rebecca replied diplomatically. "The girls have been eager to visit New York. They're even more impressive in person than in their profiles," the woman observed, watching as Emma and Olivia charmed a group of venture capitalists. Teen Vogue certainly captured Olivia's poise, but failed to convey her persuasive abilities. Rebecca followed her gaze with quiet pride. In matching Thompson design originals, subtle tech-integrated dresses that changed color slightly with body temperature, the twins commanded attention despite being the youngest attendees by several years. As the evening progressed, Rebecca maintained careful awareness of the entire room, half expecting to encounter Maxwell, but he remained conspicuously absent from the reception, his strategic addition to tomorrow's panel apparently not extending to tonight's social gathering. Later, back in their suite, Emma pulled up a comprehensive financial analysis of Reed Development on the suite's main screen. "Their debt-to-asset ratio is concerning," she noted, highlighting several figures. 3 consecutive quarters of negative growth, significant investor flight following the Miami project collapse, and their stock is trading at 17% of its value 5 years ago. "They're approaching bankruptcy," Olivia translated, her talent for distilling complex information into essential points on display. "Is that why this Maxwell Reed suddenly wants to align with technology companies? A desperate attempt to save a failing business?" Rebecca studied the projections, memories of Maxwell's arrogant certainty about his family's empire overlaying the stark evidence of its decline. "It would appear so," she agreed. "The Reed Development Group was once considered untouchable in New York real estate. William Reed, your grandfather, built it from a single property into a multi-billion-dollar corporation." "Our grandfather," Emma repeated thoughtfully. "We've never spoken about that side of the family before." "There wasn't much to say," Rebecca replied carefully. "William died before you were teenagers, and he never knew about you. That was your father's choice." As Rebecca prepared for bed, she found herself standing at the suite's windows, gazing out at the city that had once held all her dreams, then crushed them, and now welcomed her back as a conquering hero. Tomorrow she would deliver her keynote address to the most influential gathering in technology, and somewhere in that audience, watching her triumph, would be the man who had once deemed her unworthy of even basic respect. While accepting the invitation to return to the city that had nearly destroyed her, Rebecca couldn't know that in just a few hours she would be face to face with the man who had abandoned her, now desperate for her help to save what remained of his crumbling empire. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with anticipation as Rebecca took a final moment backstage to gather her thoughts. Her presentation on democratizing wearable technology had been meticulously prepared, but knowing Maxwell might be in the audience added an edge to her focus that she hadn't anticipated. "5 minutes, Ms. Thompson," the stage manager informed her quietly. Rebecca nodded, smoothing her custom Armani blazer, navy blue with subtle Thompson design accents that showcased their latest conductive fabric technology. The outfit was a calculated statement, powerful yet approachable, innovative yet classically elegant. Nothing like the desperate girl who had once roamed these same Manhattan streets in second-hand clothes. "Mom, we've uploaded the final simulation to the presentation," Emma said, joining her backstage. "The interactive demonstration of global energy savings is ready." "And I've briefed the tech team on the audience response tracking," Olivia added. "We'll have real-time metrics on engagement throughout your keynote." Rebecca smiled at her daughters, their efficiency both a comfort and a source of immense pride. "Perfect. Will you two be watching from the wings?" "Front row," Olivia corrected. "Maximum visibility for the Thompson heirs. The business press loves those shots." The stage manager gestured that it was time. Rebecca stepped onto the brilliantly lit stage to thunderous applause, the massive screens behind her displaying the Thompson design logo, a stylized T that had become one of the most recognized symbols in technology and fashion. "Thank you," Rebecca began, her voice steady and confident. 15 years ago, I was in this very city with nothing but determination and an idea. Today, that idea has evolved into a vision that is changing how we interact with technology, how we power our daily lives, and how we imagine our future." For the next 40 minutes, Rebecca commanded the room with the ease of someone who had earned her place at the pinnacle of innovation. She detailed Thompson Design's journey from functional fashion to revolutionary technology, emphasizing accessibility and sustainability alongside profitability. The audience, comprised of tech leaders, venture capitalists, and media, responded with rapt attention and frequent applause. From her position on stage, Rebecca scanned the crowd discreetly, wondering if Maxwell was present. She spotted him during her closing remarks, seated near the back, his once dark hair now peppered with gray, his expression unreadable even from a distance. Their eyes met briefly, and Rebecca felt a flicker of something, not the old pain, but a strange sense of completion, as if a long, unfinished symphony had finally found its resolving chord. "The future of technology isn't about exclusivity," she concluded. "It's about integration, accessibility, and improving lives across every demographic. At Thompson Design, we're not just creating products, we're creating possibilities. Thank you." The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. As Rebecca gracefully acknowledged the applause, she watched Maxwell remain seated, his hands coming together in what appeared to be reluctant recognition. Backstage, Rebecca was immediately surrounded by conference organizers and industry leaders, eager to continue the conversation her presentation had sparked. The twins managed the flow of well-wishers with practiced ease, their roles as unofficial gatekeepers long established within the company. "Ms. Thompson, that was revolutionary," gushed the conference director. "Your vision for integrating power generation into everyday fabric could literally change how we conceptualize energy infrastructure." "That's precisely our goal," Rebecca confirmed, accepting congratulations with gracious efficiency. 20 minutes later, as the crowd thinned, a nervous assistant approached. "Ms. Thompson, the conference president has requested your presence at the executive meeting before the panel. Apparently, there's an unexpected VIP who's expressed specific interest in your work." Rebecca checked her watch, a sleek, custom-designed piece that harvested energy from her movement throughout the day. This wasn't on the schedule. "No, ma'am. It was added last minute," the assistant confirmed, shifting uncomfortably under Rebecca's measured gaze. "Are my daughters prepared for their presentation?" "Yes, ma'am. They're in the green room finalizing details with the technical team." As Rebecca made her way toward the Madison room where the meeting would be held, she noticed subtle shifts in the behavior of the conference staff. Exchanged glances, hushed conversations that stopped as she approached, an unusual tension that suggested something significant was unfolding. She had experienced similar atmospheres before major acquisitions or partnership announcements, the electric anticipation of colliding business interests. Reaching the ornate double doors of the Madison room, Rebecca took a deliberate breath before entering. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught her to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight that greeted her. Seated at the head of the mahogany conference table, as if it were the most natural position in the world, was Maxwell Reed. 15 years had changed him. His once youthful face now showed the strain of difficult decisions and late nights, deep worry lines framing eyes that had lost their arrogant sparkle. His bespoke suit, while still expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame, suggesting recent weight loss. Rebecca froze momentarily in the doorway, the shock of seeing him up close temporarily disrupting her carefully maintained composure. The room contained only a handful of conference executives, all watching the encounter with barely disguised fascination. "Rebecca," Maxwell said, rising with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or should I say, visionary of the year, according to Forbes." The casual reference to her success, delivered with the same condescending tone she remembered from years ago, snapped Rebecca back to the present moment. She stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate calm. "Maxwell," she replied, her voice cool and controlled. "What an unexpected surprise." The tension in the room was palpable as one of the executives jumped in to explain. "Mr. Reed requested to be included last minute when he learned you would be our keynote speaker. As the new president of the East Coast Technology Development Association, his perspective seemed valuable." Maxwell gestured to an empty chair. "Please join us. We were just discussing potential cross-industry collaborations." Rebecca remained standing, unwilling to cede even the small power of positioning. "I'm curious what prompted your sudden interest in technology development, Maxwell. The Reed portfolio has traditionally focused on luxury real estate." A conference organizer intervened, clearly trying to smooth the obvious tension. "Mr. Reed has suggested a possible collaboration between Thompson Design and Reed Development on smart building projects. The integration of your fabric technology into architectural elements could revolutionize energy efficiency in urban environments." Maxwell's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It seems we've both built our empires, haven't we? Though yours is surprisingly impressive." The condescending note in "surprisingly" hung in the air between them. Rebecca registered it with the same clinical detachment she might note a competitor's tactical error during negotiations. "Is the Reed development still the Reed development?" she asked pleasantly. "I've heard rumors about financial difficulties after the Chicago project failure." Maxwell's smile faltered visibly, color rising slightly in his face. "Minor setbacks. Nothing that a strategic partnership couldn't address." Before Rebecca could respond, the door opened again, and Emma and Olivia entered. Their presence, unexpected in this executive meeting, immediately shifted the energy in the room. "Mom," Sorry to interrupt, but we need to confirm the timing for… Olivia began, then stopped abruptly as she registered the tension in the room. Rebecca watched as Maxwell's attention shifted to the twins, his expression transforming from practiced charm to shocked recognition. The blood drained from his face as he stared at the girls, taking in Emma's analytical gaze so similar to his own, Olivia's distinctive way of holding her head, the unmistakable Reed features that mirrored his own family photographs. "You have daughters," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed simply, watching as 15 years of denial crumbled in Maxwell's expression. "Emma and Olivia Thompson, my co-directors of youth innovation and heirs to Thompson Design." Maxwell gripped the edge of the conference table, visibly struggling to process what was unfolding before him. "They're my daughters," Rebecca completed firmly, emphasizing the possessive. "Girls, this is Maxwell Reed, an old acquaintance from New York." With the impeccable manners Rebecca had instilled in them since childhood, the twins extended their hands professionally. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Reed," they said, their voices nearly synchronous in a way that had always fascinated strangers. "You're twins," Maxwell stated dumbly, unable to formulate more coherent thoughts as he shook their hands automatically. 15 years next month," Emma confirmed, her analytical mind already cataloging the strange intensity of this interaction. "Do you work in technology? I don't recognize you from the Valley conferences." "Real estate," he answered mechanically, his eyes never leaving their faces. "I build things." "Interesting," Olivia commented politely, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Our mother also builds things, multi-billion-dollar companies mainly." One of the executives, sensing the need to fill the uncomfortable silence, added, "The Thompson girls are genuine prodigies. Emma already has 2 registered patents, and Olivia was recently featured in Teen Vogue as one of the most promising young entrepreneurs." Maxwell continued to stare, his gaze moving from one girl to the other, his expression a complex mixture of shock, recognition, and what appeared to be dawning regret. "You look like your father?" The question escaped him before he could contain it. A deadly silence fell over the room. The twins exchanged quick glances, their silent communication system operating as efficiently as always. It was Emma who responded with the devastating simplicity of truth. "We don't know. He didn't want to meet us." While a tense silence settled over the Madison room, Olivia observed Maxwell Reed's reaction with clinical precision, already formulating in her brilliant young mind the perfect plan for the justice her mother had never sought, but that the Thompson empire would finally make possible. The uncomfortable silence hanging in the Madison room seemed to stretch into infinity. Rebecca watched as the conference executives exchanged awkward glances, clearly unprepared for the sudden revelation of a 15-year-old secret. With practiced composure, she turned to her daughters. "Girls, would you mind giving us a moment? I believe your presentation prep team is waiting." Emma and Olivia hesitated, their identical expressions revealing they'd rather stay and witness whatever was unfolding. "We'll be fine," Rebecca assured them. "Mr. Reed and I have some business matters to discuss." The twins departed with reluctant grace, Emma glancing back analytically while Olivia's gaze lingered on Maxwell's ashen face with unmistakable calculation. As the door closed behind them, the remaining executives found sudden, urgent reasons to excuse themselves. Within moments, Rebecca and Maxwell were alone in the elegant conference room, 15 years of unspoken history suspended between them. "They're mine," Maxwell finally said, the statement somewhere between question and realization. Rebecca took a seat at the opposite end of the table, arranging herself with deliberate poise. "Biologically, yes." Maxwell ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, his composure crumbling. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The absurdity of his question hung in the air for a moment before Rebecca responded, her voice level but cold. "I did tell you. You offered me a check and threw me out of your life. I was young, scared, and I was pregnant. alone, and sleeping in Grand Central Station that night," she interrupted, her calm demeanor belying the memory's lingering sting. "But this conversation is 15 years too late, Maxwell. What do you want now?" Maxwell seemed to age before her eyes as the reality of what he'd missed, what he'd thrown away, settled on his shoulders. The financial reports on Reed Development that Rebecca had studied were visible in his strained features, the slightly frayed cuffs of his otherwise impeccable suit. "I want to know them," he said simply. "They're my daughters, too." Rebecca smiled for the first time, though without warmth. "No, Maxwell. Legally, biologically, yes. But in every way that matters? They're exclusively mine. Each tear I wiped away, each fever I treated, each story I told, that was me. Only me." Maxwell leaned forward, desperation seeping into his voice. "I can make it up to them. I have resources, connections. The combined fortune of my 15-year-old daughters exceeds 50 million each," Rebecca interrupted clinically. "Their shares in Thompson Design are in a trust fund that will make them billionaires before they're 30. They don't need your connections or your failing company." The direct hit landed visibly, Maxwell flinching as if physically struck. "How do you know about—" "I know everything about Reed Development," she replied. "I know about the outstanding loans, the investors abandoning ship, the 3 unfinished projects in Miami. I know you're 2 quarters away from complete bankruptcy." The door opened again, interrupting whatever Maxwell might have said. The twins returned, now accompanied by Janet Chen, Thompson Design's formidable CFO. "Everything's ready for the youth presentation, Mom," Olivia reported, studying the tension between the adults with undisguised curiosity. "And those documents you requested," Janet added, placing an elegant leather portfolio on the conference table. Maxwell eyed the portfolio with apprehension. "What is that?" "An offer," Rebecca answered. "Thompson Design is interested in acquiring Reed Development's interior design division to integrate with our new smart home line." "You want to buy part of my company?" Maxwell asked incredulously. "No, Maxwell. I want to buy the entire company," Rebecca corrected. "The independent valuation places current worth at approximately 1/10 of what it was when your father was alive. I'm offering a 15% premium above that value, considering the historic name." Maxwell paled further, his hands trembling slightly as he processed her words. "This is about revenge? Public humiliation?" Emma, observing carefully, frowned in confusion. "Mom, why does he think it's personal? It's just a strategic acquisition." Rebecca kept her gaze fixed on Maxwell while answering. "Because Mr. Reed and I have history, sweetheart. A history that perhaps it's time you both learned about." The moment of truth had arrived. Rebecca gestured for everyone to sit, and with remarkable composure revealed to her daughters the identity of their father. She outlined their brief relationship, her pregnancy, and his rejection, careful to present the facts without emotional coloring. Emma and Olivia's reactions reflected their distinct personalities. Emma absorbed the information with analytical detachment, processing each revelation for its logical implications. Olivia's expressive face cycled through shock, indignation, and finally, a clinical curiosity about the man who had contributed to her existence, but never to her life. "So you're our biological father," Emma eventually concluded, studying Maxwell as if he were a rare specimen under microscope. "Interesting. Genetically speaking, it explains my predisposition for migraines." "And you completely rejected us?" Olivia questioned directly. "You didn't even want to know if we were healthy?" Maxwell attempted to explain himself through a series of increasingly hollow justifications about youth, family pressure, and fear, but each word rang emptier in the face of the exceptional, self-possessed young women before him. "I've changed," he finally pleaded. "We can start over. I have the right to know you, to be part of your lives." It was Emma who responded with the implacable logic inherited from her mother. "Rights are accompanied by responsibilities, Mr. Reed. You abdicated your responsibilities 15 years ago. Your rights expired along with them." Olivia added with finality. "Our family is complete. It always has been." Janet, who had remained silently observing the exchange, placed another folder on the table. "Rebecca, Thompson shares rose 3% after your presentation. Total valuation now exceeds $3.5 billion. Maxwell stared at the documents spread across the table, the magnitude of the empire Rebecca had built alone finally hitting him with full force. "You really did it, didn't you?" he murmured. "Built something extraordinary from nothing." "Not from nothing," Rebecca corrected, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "From everything that mattered." The executive boardroom cleared as preparations for the final presentation commenced. Rebecca and the twins made their way to the main ballroom where Olivia would introduce her mother's closing remarks. Maxwell, relegated to the audience, found himself seated in the last row, a symbolic distance from the stage that represented his position in their lives. Olivia took the podium with the confidence of someone born to command attention. The audience, investors, tech leaders, and media, leaned forward, captivated by the poised 15-year-old addressing them with the authority of a seasoned executive. "Our mother taught us that obstacles are just opportunities in disguise," Olivia declared to the enthralled crowd. When an investor rejected her first business plan saying that single mothers lacked the focus to build successful companies, she transformed that rejection into motivation to create a company now worth more than his ever was. The ballroom erupted in applause while Maxwell in the last row finally faced the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just a family, but the chance to be part of the extraordinary success story Rebecca had written line by line against all odds. The next morning, as Rebecca and the twins boarded their private jet back to San Francisco, major financial outlets announced Thompson Design Innovations' acquisition of the historic Reed Development Group. Maxwell Reed, according to footnotes, would assume a consulting role without decision-making authority. For Rebecca, watching Manhattan shrink beneath the plane's wings, the circle finally closed. Not with vengeance, but with something infinitely more powerful. The simple truth that she had transformed the most painful rejection of her life into the foundation of her most absolute triumph. As the jet reached cruising altitude, Emma looked up from her tablet. "The acquisition announcement increased our stock by another 2%. The market clearly approves." "Of course it does," Olivia replied pragmatically. "Reed Development's remaining assets will integrate perfectly with our smart building initiative." Rebecca smiled at her daughters, these extraordinary young women who were her greatest achievement. "Are you okay? Meeting him was unexpected." Emma considered the question with her usual analytical precision. "It was informative to observe the genetic contributor to 50% of our DNA. The environmental factors clearly proved more significant to developmental outcomes." "He seemed sad," Olivia noted, her intuitive understanding of human psychology ever sharp. Like someone who realized too late what he'd thrown away. Rebecca gazed out at the clouds stretching endlessly below them. "Sometimes the hardest lessons come when we finally understand the value of what we discarded." As the plane carried them westward, Rebecca felt the weight of the past finally lifting. She had returned to New York, not as the broken girl who had fled, but as the woman who had conquered. Not just the business world, but her own deepest fears. The circle was complete. In the exclusive Manhattan apartment he'd downsized to after selling the Tribeca penthouse, Maxwell Reed watched the business channels announce the acquisition that ended his family's century-long real estate dynasty. On the screen, archive footage showed Rebecca at the previous year's technology summit, confidently outlining her vision for the future, a future he could have shared had he made different choices 15 years ago. As he poured himself a drink, Maxwell finally understood that his greatest failure wasn't losing the Reed empire, but failing to recognize that the pregnant waitress he had dismissed as insignificant would become the extraordinary woman who would one day hold his fate in her hands. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.